The elite of the world have a special way of looking at people like me. They don't. To the residents of the Vanderbilt Heights, I'm just the maid. I'm the girl who cleans the wine spills of the $50,000 rugs, the one who polishes the silver until I can see my own tired eyes reflecting back, and the one who is expected to be invisible. But I have a name. It's Cassia, and I wasn't born to hold a mop. 24 years ago, the Vanderbilt family was the most powerful name in the shipping industry. My father, Julian Vanderbilt, was a king. But when he died in a mysterious plane crash, his loyal business partner, Arthur Thorne, didn't just take the company. He erased us. My mother was framed for embezzlement and died in prison, and I was dumped in a state orphanage under a fake name. Arthur Thorne now lives in my father's house. He sits in my father's office. He even drinks from my father's vintage scotch collection. He thinks the Vanderbilt bloodline is extinct. He has no idea that the Archive Maid he hired to organize his massive, dusty library is the rightful heir to every brick in this mansion. I spent 6 months working for a cleaning agency, slowly moving from small apartments to luxury penthouses until I finally landed the impossible contract, the Thorne estate. Arthur Thorne is obsessed with history. He has a private archive in the basement containing documents that date back to the 1800s. He needed someone with an eye for detail to digitize his records. Because I had spent my nights in the orphanage library teaching myself law and history, I was overqualified, but I played the part of the simple girl from the country. "Don't touch the locked cabinets, Cassia," Arthur told me on my first day, his voice like sandpaper. "Just index the shipping logs. And remember, you are here to work, not to think." "Yes, Mr. Thorne," I said, dropping my head. But as soon as he left, I looked at the locked cabinets. They weren't just locked. They were protected by a biometric pulse lock. It was a technology my father had developed, one that responded to the unique heat signature of the Vanderbilt DNA. I walked up to the most secure cabinet in the room. My heart was thundering. If Arthur was right and I was nobody, the alarm would alert the entire security team. If I was who I thought I was, I placed my palm against the cold steel. The light turned from red to a soft, welcoming green. Click. Inside wasn't gold or jewelry. It was a single leather-bound journal, my father's private diary from the month he died. The first line read, "Arthur is planning a ghost ship. He doesn't want the cargo. He wants the insurance on the world's economy." I realized then that my father wasn't killed because of a business rivalry. He was killed because he discovered that Arthur Thorne was planning to trigger a global financial collapse. And now, 24 years later, the ghost ship was finally ready to sail.
The leather-bound journal felt heavy in my hands, a relic of a life that was stolen from me. As I read my father's frantic handwriting, the basement archive felt less like a library and more like a crime scene. But I didn't have much time to mourn. The mansion had ears, and one pair of those ears belonged to Julian Thorne, Arthur's son, named after the man his father murdered. Julian Thorne was nothing like his father. Arthur was a blunt instrument of greed, but Julian was a razor blade. He was the golden boy of the tech finance world, and he spent his days in the upper floors of the mansion, orchestrating digital trades that could move markets in seconds. I was tucked away in a corner of the archive, my hand still resting on the opened biometric cabinet, when the heavy oak door creaked. I slammed the cabinet shut, just as Julian walked in. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in a black silk shirt, looking bored and dangerous. "You're working late, Cassia," he said, his eyes scanning the room. He didn't look at me like a person. He looked at me like a piece of furniture that had been moved. "The logs are quite disorganized, Mr. Thorne," I said, instantly dropping into my maid persona. I picked up a duster and began vigorously cleaning the top of a shelf. "Mr. Arthur wants them indexed by the end of the week." Julian walked toward the biometric cabinet. My breath hitched. If he saw the green light still fading, I was dead. He stopped inches from it, his fingers tracing the wood. "My father is obsessed with this dust," Julian whispered. "He thinks the past is where the power is. He doesn't realize that the real power is in the deletion of the past." He turned to me, his gaze sharpening. "You have a peculiar habit, Cassia. You don't smell like cleaning supplies. You smell like old paper and expensive ink. Why is a girl with your vocabulary working in a basement?" "I like the quiet, sir," I replied, keeping my eyes on his shoes. "The quiet doesn't ask questions." He chuckled, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. "Be careful, Cassia. Sometimes the quiet is where people go to disappear." After he left, I didn't stop. I knew I had to find the ghost ship my father mentioned. I spent the next 6 hours cross-referencing the old shipping logs with the new digital manifests I had swiped from Julian's tablet earlier that week. A simple trick of accidental bumping while serving coffee. I found it. The SS Elysium. On paper, the ship was a scrap metal carrier sailing from Singapore. But in the encrypted digital ledger, the Elysium was carrying something called the Omega Key. It wasn't physical cargo. It was a massive server array designed to hijack the global satellite banking system. Arthur and Julian weren't just shipping goods. They were shipping a digital bomb that would wipe out the debts of the elite while erasing the savings of the middle class. As the sun began to rise, I realized that my father's death was the first step in a 20-year plan. The plane crash wasn't an accident. It was a distraction to hide the theft of the original code for the Omega Key. But I found something else tucked into the back of the ledger. A photograph. It was my mother and father on the day I was born. On the back, in my mother's elegant script, were the words, "The key only turns for the one who carries the heart." I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of a monitor. My father hadn't just left me a company. He had encoded the heart of the system into the one thing Arthur Thorne could never steal, my own biometric signature. I am not just the Archive Maid. I am the password. But as I moved to leave the basement, I saw a red light blinking on the security panel. The cabinet hadn't just opened for me, it had sent a silent alert to Arthur's private phone. The invisible girl was finally on their radar. The alert on the security panel was a death sentence, but I had one advantage: Arthur Thorne's arrogance. He didn't believe a maid could be a Vanderbilt. He assumed the system had glitched or an intruder had escaped. He didn't realize the intruder was currently polishing his crystal snifters for the Midnight Meridian Gala. This gala was the cover. While the world's most powerful billionaires toasted to progress in the ballroom, the SS Elysium would reach the mid-Atlantic point, the precise location to broadcast the Omega Key signal, and rewrite the world's wealth. I knew I couldn't stop the upload from the basement. The primary transmitter was located in Arthur's private study on the penthouse floor, a place no staff member was allowed to enter during the gala. I needed a way in. I used the emergency fund my father had hidden in the archive wall, a collection of rare, high-value diamonds. I didn't sell them. I used one to bribe the lead event coordinator. The girl assigned to the penthouse drink service caught the flu, I told her, keeping my head low. I can take her shift. I know the Mr. Thorne's preferences perfectly. But a maid's uniform wouldn't get me past the biometric scanners in the private elevator. I needed to look like one of them. In the chaos of the gala preparations, I borrowed a vintage gown from the mansion's historical collection, a deep midnight blue silk dress that belongs to my mother. It was a Vanderbilt heirloom that Arthur kept as a trophy. The gala was a sea of masks, golden lions, silver foxes, and porcelain dolls. I put on a delicate lace mask that covered the upper half of my face. As I stepped into the ballroom, the scent of expensive perfume and betrayal was overwhelming. I wasn't Cassia the maid anymore. I was a ghost in silk. I spotted Julian Thorne near the champagne fountain. He was looking at his watch every 30 seconds. The Elysium was nearing the drop zone. I moved toward the private elevator, my heart hammering. To trigger the elevator, I needed a key card, which was kept in Arthur's breast pocket. I waited for the moment Arthur was surrounded by lobbyists. I stumbled into him, spilling a drop of vintage wine on his cuff. "Clumsy girl," he barked, his face turning purple. "I am so sorry, Excellency," I whispered, my fingers dancing with the speed of a professional thief. In the 3 seconds of his distraction, I slipped the card from his pocket and replaced it with a dummy card I had carved from a plastic tray. I reached the elevator. I swiped the card and pressed my thumb to the scanner. The machine whirred. Recognized. Vanderbilt Prime. The elevator didn't go to the penthouse. It went to the command center, hidden behind the penthouse walls. When the doors opened, I wasn't in a bedroom. I was in a room filled with monitors showing the live feed of the SS Elysium. The upload bar was at 62%. I rushed to the main terminal. The screen read, "Biometric confirmation required to hold broadcast." I placed my hand on the glass. The system began to scan. DNA match, 99.9%. Subject, Cassia Vanderbilt. Status, deceased. Identity conflict, the computer chimed. Status must be active to override. Suddenly, the lights in the room turned a cold, surgical white. The elevator doors opened again. Julian Thorne stepped out, holding a glass of scotch. He wasn't surprised. He was smiling. "I told you the quiet was where people go to disappear, Cassia," he said, walking toward me. "Or should I call you cousin?" He knew. He had known since the basement. And now I was trapped in a room with the man who was about to delete my future, and the rest of the world's, forever. Julian Thorne didn't rush at me. He didn't scream. He simply leaned against the mahogany desk, swirling his scotch as if we were discussing the weather rather than a global heist. "You have your father's eyes, Cassia," Julian said, his voice dripping with a terrifying calmness. "My father thought he killed the Vanderbilt line, but I knew. I watched the security footage of you in the basement. The way you touched the books. You didn't look at them like a maid. You looked at them like an owner. If you knew, why let me get this far?" I asked, my hand still pressed against the scanner, trying to force the active status. "Because I need you," he whispered, stepping closer. "My father is old. He wants to destroy the system out of spite. But I want to own it. The Omega key requires a biometric pulse that only a direct Vanderbilt descendant can provide. My father's code is a hack. it's unstable. But with your actual DNA, the upload won't just be a crash. It will be a total takeover. We could rule everything together. I'd rather burn this building to the ground than help a Thorne, I spat. Julian laughed. You think my father killed your parents? Look at the screen, Cassia. He tapped a key, and a hidden file from the SS Elysium server popped up. It was a black box recording from my father's plane. I heard my father's voice, but he wasn't screaming. He was arguing with my mother. The system is too powerful, Julian, my mother's voice echoed. If Arthur gets the key, he'll enslave everyone. We have to crash the plane. It's the only way to bury the code. My heart shattered. My parents didn't die in an accident. They chose to die to protect the world from the technology they had created. And they had left me in that orphanage, not out of neglect, but to keep me away from the key that was literally written into my blood. The upload is at 88%, Julian noted, his smile vanishing. Time for the choice, cousin. Give me your pulse, or I take it from your cold hand. He pulled a sleek silver taser from his pocket. I didn't wait. I grabbed a heavy glass award from the desk and hurled it at the main monitor. The glass shattered, but the upload continued. Julian lunged, grabbing my arm with a grip like a vice. I used the moves I had learned in the streets after escaping the orphanage. I drove my heel into his instep and slammed my forehead into his nose. He grunted, blood spraying onto my mother's blue silk dress. You little peasant, he roared, swinging the taser. I dodged, rolling over the server desk. I needed to get to the manual thermal vent. My father's journal had mentioned that the system was liquid-cooled. If I could trigger a thermal emergency, the biometric lock would default to an emergency purge. I reached the cooling lever, but Julian tackled me to the floor. We scrambled in the dark, the only light coming from the red upload bar. 96%? 97%? It's too late, Julian yelled, pinning my wrists down. The Elysium is in position. I looked at the terminal. I realized I couldn't stop the upload with a hack. I had to fulfill my mother's final wish. I didn't need to stop the data. I had to corrupt it. I bit Julian's hand, forcing him to release me for a split second. I didn't run for the door. I ran back to the scanner. Instead of a calm palm press, I smashed the emergency glass and sliced my palm on the shard. I pressed my bleeding hand onto the sensor. The computer went K-wire. DNA corrupted. Bloodborne pathogen detected in BioLink. Critical error. What are you doing? Julian screamed, scrambling to the keyboard. My father called it the Phoenix Protocol, I whispered, the pain in my hand searing. If the key is stolen, the blood of a Vanderbilt destroys the lock. The screen turned blood red. The SS Elysium feed showed the ship's mast exploding as the server array self-destructed. On the global map, the red lines of the Thorne Empire began to blink and vanish. The Omega key was gone. And as the mansion's alarms began to wail, I realized Arthur Thorne's private security was on their way up. I had destroyed the weapon, but I was still in the heart of the enemy's lair. The penthouse was no longer a sanctuary of wealth. It was a cage of sirens and smoke. The Phoenix Protocol hadn't just destroyed the SS Elysium out at sea. It had triggered a feedback loop into the Thorne servers. Every illegal contract, every bribe, and every record of my parents' erasure was being broadcasted to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the world. Julian Thorne stared at the monitors in horror. His face, once the picture of arrogant perfection, was now pale and smeared with blood. You've wiped us out," he whispered. "Every cent, every offshore account, it's all gone." "It was never yours, Julian," I said, wrapping a silk ribbon from my dress around my bleeding hand. "You were just the caretakers of a stolen legacy." The elevators were dead. The mansion's AI had locked down the building to prevent the spread of the data virus. I knew I couldn't stay. Arthur Thorne's private security team, men who were more mercenaries than guards, were coming up the emergency stairs. I could hear their heavy boots echoing in the stairwell. I looked at the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The gala below had turned into a riot. Guests were fleeing as the FBI and Interpol helicopters began to swarm the estate. "The library," I whispered to myself. My father had mentioned a hidden service chute behind the History of Navigation section, a way to move heavy archives without using the public halls. I bolted for the door, Julian screaming behind me, but he was too broken to follow. I navigated the smoke-filled corridors, my maid's memory of the floor plan saving my life. I reached the library just as the first security team breached the penthouse. I pulled the hidden lever. A section of the mahogany shelving slid back, revealing a narrow, steep metal slide designed for document crates. I didn't think twice. I jumped. I tumbled out into the wet grass of the mansion's rear gardens, far from the flashing police lights at the front gate. I stripped off the midnight blue gown, revealing my simple maid's tunic underneath. I looked like just another terrified staff member escaping the fire. I walked past the gates, my head down, blending into the crowd of fleeing caterers and cleaners. 2 days later, the world woke up to a different reality. The Thorne family was in custody. Arthur Thorne had tried to flee to a non-extradition country, but his private jet was grounded. His pilot had seen the news and realized his employer's money was now worthless. I sat in a small, quiet cafe in the city, holding a newspaper. The headline read, "The Vanderbilt Ghost. Anonymous whistleblower destroys Thorne empire." Under the table, I held a small, black USB drive. It contained the one thing I didn't broadcast: the true coordinates of the Vanderbilt Family Trust, a fund my father had set up for the survivors of the crash. It wasn't billions, but it was enough to rebuild. I walked to the Vanderbilt Heights one last time. The mansion was wrapped in yellow crime scene tape. I stood at the edge of the property, looking at the library windows. A lawyer in a sharp suit approached me. "Can I help you, miss? This is private property under federal seizure." I didn't look like a maid anymore. I stood tall, my hand bandaged but steady. I handed him a small, tattered birth certificate from the orphanage and the original leather-bound journal. "My name is Cassia Vanderbilt," I said, my voice clear and cold. "And I'd like to see my father's office." The lawyer froze, looking from the documents to my face. He saw the eyes, the Vanderbilt eyes. He stepped back and lifted the tape. "Welcome home, Miss Vanderbilt." I walked into the house, not through the servants' entrance, but through the front door. The dust was still there, but for the first time in 24 years, I wasn't the one who had to clean it. I was the one who owned the light that let everyone see it.